fossil rivers of the Sahara when it was green 14,005 to 5,000 years ago, and they tell of the threat of warming. Now, various things have happened to the Sahara. We know that it was once, of course, very lush, very green, tremendous rainfall, and we even have various archaeologists, Egyptologists telling us that the Sphinx and the pyramids were covered with water up to the neck of the Sphinx, and we even had sand to the neck of the Sphinx up to the 19th century. And this is an ancient Greek map of what they thought the northern African continent looked like. We know that it was very lush, and it even had two huge lakes, Lake Chad, and to the south of that, Lake George, and to the southeast we have the area of the Great Rift Valley, that part of eastern Africa that's about to slough off. That's a volcanic region, and we have one of the highest volcanoes in the world, Kilimanjaro, around there. And Madagascar, we know previously was part of Africa, but it broke off. And this is what supposedly looked like at the area of, well, even Egypt. Egypt here is shown as being desertification, but one of the things they believed took place was a tremendous amount of climate change. Now, this is today's article from the University of Geneva, New Findings. Fossil rivers of the Sahara tell of the threat of warming. Why did the people living near the Nile River migrate to central Egypt 10,000 years ago, when the Egyptian Sahara was still green? I support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support, and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box. Now, we know even from the Old Testament that various rivers, 4 great rivers, were identified. Of course, there have been many earth changes since then, from thousands of years ago, and obviously this is not what Africa looks like today, the Northern Africa. Neither is this what Africa looks like today. Now, why did the people living near the Nile River migrate to central Egypt 10,000 years ago when the Egyptian Sahara was still green? This is what geologists led by University of Geneva, UNIGE, Switzerland, studied the fossil rivers north of Lake Nasser in Egypt in order to reconstruct the paleohydrology of the region. They wanted to determine the rainfall rate of this African humid period. They found that following a rapid temperature increase of about 7 degrees Celsius, of course, the frequency of heavy rainfall events increased fourfold, increasing river flooding and forcing riverine populations to migrate to the center of the country. These results, to be read out in the Journal of Quaternary Science Reviews, highlight the increase in extreme weather episodes in the event of global warming, extreme weather. Now, Africa experienced a wet period between 14,800 years ago and 5,500 BC, characterized by a still green Sahara. However, this region north of Lake Nasser in Egypt is now arid, leaving only fossilized rivers as traces of this green past. These rivers are essentially for reconstructing past climates, as they allow us to determine the quantities of flowing water at the time, as well as the quantities and frequencies of the rainfall. This is what Abdallah Zaki explains. He's a PhD researcher in the Department of Earth Sciences at the UNIG Faculty of Science in Geneva, the first author of the study. Reconstructing river discharge to obtain precipitation rates. To reconstruct the paleohydrology of the region, it's first necessary to measure the pebbles in the fossil rivers. Large pebbles indicate a high water discharge, capable of transporting them. As to the depth and width of the river, which make it possible to assess the water discharge, for instance in units of cubic meters per second, says Sebastian Castletort, Associate Professor, Department of Earth Sciences, and final author of the study. The second step is to find out the surface area of the drainage basin, hence the area that connects the water upstream to the river. By combining these two figures, we obtain the precipitation rate responsible for transporting the studied sediments, continues a Geneva researcher. And to find the age of the rivers, the scientists used two different techniques. The first, carried out in collaboration with ETH Zurich, uses carbon-14 dating of the organic matter that fills the fossilized rivers. The second, called optical stimulated luminescence and carried out with specialists from the University of Lausanne, consists of measuring the luminescence of quartz to obtain the age of the sediment deposit. There was a sharp increase in intense rainfall, they found. The scientists carried out this work on 6 rivers in the region, and they confirmed that the rivers were mainly active between 13,000 and 5,000 BC, hence at the height of the African wet period. But what is particularly interesting is that our study shows that the rainfall was very intense, with rates of 55 to 80 millimeters per hour, so that's pretty fast. And that such rainfall events were 3 to 4 times more frequent than before the African human period, which is an enormous climate perturbation, says Abdullah Zaki. So indeed, the annual rainfall rate alone does not reflect the intensity of the rains and therefore the consequences. If we take London as an example, we have the impression that it rains all the time, illustrates Sebastian Castle-Tort. However, London sees an average of 680 millimeters of rain per year, compared to about 1,400 millimeters in Geneva, Switzerland, which is more than twice as much. It's simply that in London, rainfall is spread out over the whole year, whereas it's more concentrated in Geneva. An explanation for the strong migration of the Nile populations. The results obtained by the geologists, hence this study increase in the frequency of intense rainfall events, provide an explanation for the strong migration of the region's riparian, that's living near the river, populations towards the center of the territory at the time. As observed by the archaeologists, indeed, the violent flooding of the rivers increased, making the banks inhospitable, confirms Abdullah Zaki. Maybe that explains what happened to the Sphinx, for example, that was covered in sand up to its neck, the intense flooding, carrying the sands from everywhere. Anyway, this fourfold increase in violent rainfall also coincides with a 7 degrees Celsius increase in temperature in the region, they said. This study thus provides us with a historic lesson told by the rocks on how the Earth system behaves in the event of rapid global warming, says Sebastian Castle-Tort. And understanding the distribution of precipitation over the year, it will become a key issue in risk prevention today, because in a period of global warming, these risks will also increase in the future. So what happened in Germany this summer, he said, will certainly become more common, he concludes, because Germany had tremendous flooding this past summer. This was from University of Geneva on phys.org. Of course, here they don't tell us anything about the comet impact that took place about 14,000 years ago. And we had various parts of the Northern Hemisphere bombarded by that comet, those comet fragments impacting. Some of them, we were told, were over a mile big. And we have scars all over the Northern Hemisphere. They also fell in the Southern Hemisphere. They also caused a burning event. They found a black soot of ash all around the Northern Hemisphere around 14,000 years ago. That was the younger Dryas comet, as we know. That put an end to the Clovis culture in North America. So it's not just climate change. What caused the climate change and also caused the desertification of the Sahara? We found that the Sahara was also hit. Recently, they found it from Google Earth images. They found that about 5,000 years ago, a comet had struck in southwestern Egypt and also caused volcanic eruptions. So, and another one was found in 2004 in Iraq by another person who was looking at Google Earth images, finding that another impact caused global volcanic eruptions in Iraq-Iran area. So it's not just climate change. It's also what caused the climate change. It could have been, for example, the Younger Dryas Comet that took place about 14,800 years ago. Please leave your comments and thank you for your support.